Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Web Design DeCal. We are in week 6, so that makes this halfway through, because this course is only 12 weeks long. So I hope you guys feel at least halfway prepared to be able to web design. How was the homework? Homework was pretty interesting this time. It was like a sampler of CSS problems. First of all, is the mic working? Can anyone? OK, we're good. All right. So who spent more than 2 hours on the homework? Just OK. All right. Well, I guess it was probably pretty manageable. I think it was more or less stuff that we went over in class. But again, if there are any questions, we always have our piazza. So today we're going to be talking, at least in the programming section, we're just going to be talking about the cool things in HTML and CSS. The things that are sort of bleeding edge, I guess you could say, but HTML kind of moves really slow. In fact, I read today actually that it's only in 2014 that the specification or the spec for HTML5 will officially be published. So in 2014. So the last time we had an HTML version, HTML4, it was like 1999. So the sort of iteration cycle for HTML is something like 15 years. And it's run by this nonprofit. I think it's the W3 Consortium who runs this stuff, in case you were curious. So we're basically just going to be talking about the new things that come out in HTML5 that I guess will be officially formalized this year. So I hope by now this class has either convinced you or confirmed to you how truly amazing the internet is. Some might say it's like the best invention that people have ever had, because like if you think about it, it's like sort of the nexus of all of human knowledge, but in a place where everyone can access it with a device that's like no bigger than a deck of cards, right? Like it's amazing. If you told someone like in the late 80s, or maybe like the mid 80s, early 80s, that something like that was possible, you could access like the sum of human knowledge from like a tiny mobile device, they might think you were pretty crazy. And they'd be right to, because like that's insane. So as much as we talk about like the details of like syntax and like what pseudo-classes are, and like how come my program doesn't work, I think it's also good to just sometimes step back a little bit and think about like what we're designing for. Like you want the future's web, the future's internet to be better than the past internet, right? So that's just sort of the motivation that we're doing what we do. And it's best to keep your technologies that you use as updated as possible. So that way you don't have like fragmentation and all sorts of annoying things that come with that. So anyway, long spiel over. Let's talk about HTML5 and CSS3. So these are sort of the icons for what we're going to be talking about today. And today we just want to learn or just have knowledge of the existence of certain properties that exist. So that way you know that, say you want to embed a native video as opposed to linking to a YouTube video, you know where to go for that. Or you know that there exists a tag in HTML5 to allow you to do that. So first, let's just focus on HTML5. So in HTML5, as opposed to just having sort of the generic body and head tags that we're sort of used to, there are actually sort of new semantic tags that are sort of sanctioned off for particular purposes. So typically, most every website there's a header, right? Which typically everything that sits at the head of a page. And there's also typically a footer, which I guess in most cases has like copyright information or contact information or just the tiny little text you read at the bottom. And for the most part, this stuff doesn't vary so much. So the great architects of HTML decided maybe we should make just separate tags for that are more specific than, say, some general div. And so that's exactly what they did. And they have new header and footer tags. Again, like divs, they don't actually alter the appearance of the page, but they're just good for sort of marking things off on a page and making sure they're consistent. We also have new tags for multimedia. So as opposed to just the IMG image tag, now we have video and audio. And thankfully, they're not abbreviated in a way that's like strange, like images, in my opinion. It's video and audio, so that's nice. And actually, like what's really cool is the canvas element. So this is sort of like really cutting edge. Like, is this a browser or is this native software? It's hard to tell nowadays because the browser is getting so powerful. Like, so the canvas or a canvas tag typically involves elements that on the page that make you go like, how's that even done? And it's typically enabled with a lot of JavaScript and various JavaScript libraries. However, I think it's still important to know about. I wonder if I can bring up an example here. Let's see. So I saw something the other day that I thought was like, holy moly. And here it is. So obviously, we're in a web browser. We're in Google Chrome. But in today's Google Chrome, you can render actual web graphics using a certain library. In this case, the web graphics library, aka pretty much the standard, so pretty much the only one. But this is in the browser, but like the colors and the reflections, it's all so real, right? But we're in the browser, so I don't know. I think that's totally nonsensical. And when you think about what is the future going to look like, what if there's a world where there's only a browser and there's only web software? I know, if anyone's listening on the webcast and it's like a hardcore native software purist, they'd probably yell at me. But I just think it's interesting to think about. So HTML5. Now you have things where you can well, of course, it's compatible with CSS3. That sort of has to be the case. But you can also sort of do drag and drop, which is sort of what you normally associate with being kind of difficult to do. But you can do that in HTML5. You can even grab the geolocation of whoever is using your app. So this is all very possible. I won't go into specifics because I don't have enough time. But just know that that's a very possible and very real thing that you can do from the browser. An HTML5 modern web app would look something like this. So as opposed to just head bodying a bunch of divs and you sort of ID off what each of these is, now there are just designated tags for that. So you don't really have to ID off. You have a nav tag now. So for the ultra common nav bar, and now you know that there exists a tag for that in general. Same with footer, articles for sections of text and general sections, things like this. So like I said, you should be aware that there exists a video tag now in HTML5. It looks something like this. But, it's kind of like an image. You can set the height and the width. And actually, what's different, I guess, is that there are controls, because unlike in an image, there are actual video controls like pause, go, fast forward, rewind, and you still source it the same. But here's something interesting. Since not all browsers, depending on what version they're on, can support this kind of new HTML5 stuff, in the case that it can't render it for some reason or another, like you're on an ancient version of IE or something like that, then there's actually some text here, if you'll notice. It's your browser does not support the video tag. So basically, this obviously won't show up if it does support it. But in the case that it doesn't, it'll just have this text as a sort of, this is how it fails. This is what happens when you can't render it. So a lot of the cool things that I've talked about and I showed you, like that awesome race car rendering, they're sort of really only truly unlocked when you understand JavaScript. And so you'll be introduced to that starting next week. I know that just to clarify, I know on the website and I know on the live webcast and everything like that, we say that today is JavaScript basics. But we kind of made a last-minute switch because I thought it would be cool and have more closure around our HTML and CSS journey to go over and talk about this stuff before we dived into JavaScript. I also think it makes a lot of sense because next week you have project presentations, right? So it's sort of divided by JavaScript. Like your project presentations are totally sort of non-dynamic, sort of really static. They don't really interact like JavaScript will teach you how. So it's sort of just divided in the middle by the group projects. How's everyone doing on the projects, by the way? Who's kind of excited to demo what they have at the moment? Who's like, I can't wait. OK. All right. Well, I guess everyone's modest, which is good, because that was a test. But in general, it'll be really interesting, because we'll still be webcasting it live, the presentations, that is. So the cool thing about that, I guess, is that if you do a great job, which I'm hoping everyone will do, and actually, based on the check-ins, I think I feel pretty good about that, you'll be able to have a YouTube link that you can sort of point to, and you can sort of timestamp, like, hey, this is when I started presenting my midterm project for Web DeCal, and you can show it off, to employers or your mom or whoever. So that's always kind of cool. All right, so we're already in CSS3. So we kind of already brushed over some of this at some point or another, but it always helps to go over it again. We know that there exist things called pseudo-classes in CSS. The one that we've really gone over is hover. So what that means is that if you have any element, if you add just :hover, you can style how that element looks when you hover over it with your mouse. So most likely it's going to be different. Otherwise, there's no point in having it. You also get animations, which was previously sort of only a JavaScript-only thing because it required that kind of muscle. But now you can do it in CSS. So CSS, is getting pretty powerful too. Animations, both 2D, just sort of in the same plane, and also sort of 3D animations too. Those are all possible. And you also get transitions. I think we talked about this a little bit. We'll certainly talk about it in the hands-on. The hands-on, by the way, is really, really cool. It's I'm actually speeding up a little bit just so that they have more time because it looks really nice. It goes over a lot of these new properties, and it's delivered by awesome people. So it's going to be pretty cool. So yeah, in addition to the hover pseudo-class, there also exists a visited pseudo-class. The syntax looks like this. Like I said, it's the standard whatever you would select, but then : and then the pseudo-class. And so here are the really common ones, of which I think hover will probably, oh boy, that's bothersome. But anyway, of which only hover is probably the most common one that you'll use, but there's also something called visited. So for links you visited, the standard behavior, right? You click on a link that's blue. Like imagine we're in just HTML1, no styling has happened. You click on a link, it's blue. You exit out of that tab. What color is it now? Yeah, it's purple. Yeah. So that's like standard default thing. Like it's been clicked, it's purple. But you can change that. It doesn't have to be like that. So that's an option. Let's see. So as you click the link, there's also a really, really fast one called active, which as you're clicking on, like something could happen. I don't know, whatever you want. And also focus. So like let's say you have a form and you've got a lot of inputs. Right when you click on a certain input, what do you want to happen? In general, nothing happens, but you can imagine it being selected or something, or like I don't know, however you want to style it. There's a pseudo-class for that. Are there any questions to anything I've said so far? Question?
How many seconds does it normally take for hover to be activated?
OK, so the question was, how many seconds does it take for hover to be activated? This is actually something that you can set in CSS transitions. You basically can hard code an amount of time. I think by default it's sort of instantaneous, and which is not typically a good thing because it's just like very jarring. But if you can set a transition, say like 0.2, 0.3 seconds, then it's nice and it does it at the speed that you want it to. So just in case, I can just sort of show you that, let's say this square is something that has a hover pseudo-class, and when you hover over it, it turns blue. So that's what hover would be. In the case of active and visited, as you click on it, it might do something like turn red. I guess in general it would do that. And then after it's been visited, it turns purple. But of course you can change that. And likewise, here's that form I was talking about. You have a bunch of input tags, and you select any one of them in particular. And then something happens to it that suggests that that's the one that you're on. So now transitioning off of pseudo-classes, we're going to move on to transformations. So something really kind of cool is that I guess you could think of, you can trigger a transformation based on pseudo-classes, right? So you imagine like you hover over a square, and then one of these transformations happens. So for example, just the translate transformation, right? It's a simple one. The property is called transform, and you translate it some amount of x pixels and some amount of y pixels. So in this case, you can imagine like it going transform, so 10 to the right, 80 to the top, for this example. In addition to like standard translating, there's also sort of rotating. This is all in 2D, by the way, so we're still in 2D space. And you can also rotate it 45 degrees, and it takes in some degree amount. Let's see. You can also scale the object that you're talking about. So you can sort of scale it in the x, like how much it is in the x direction and the y direction too. Again, I guess these slides are mostly for reference, really. Like if you, in case you wanted to know how to do them, you can always come back to them. Because I always find talking about syntax kind of like iffy. But yeah, there's also skewing too, which is really interesting. Basically, you can here actually there. So you can basically skew the degree amounts on the x side and the y side, and you can make like interesting shapes. Because it may be interesting to think about, but some things in CSS aren't actually like trivially made, even though they sound trivial, like triangles, for example. Like if you think about it, like you can easily make rectangles and things of that nature, but how would you make a triangle? This is something to think about, and we're going to do it in the hands-on. We'll show you one way of doing it, but you know, it might be it's a brain teaser. So also, like there exists really cool stuff you can do in 3D now, and we're not even using JavaScript. So that's really cool. You can basically do a lot of the same things. You can do the translate, rotating, and scaling, but you can do it in 3D space now. So you know, here's what the sort of calls to those kinds of actions look like. And now you have, I guess, like the main difference is now you have like a sort of z kind of like z index where like you know it's sort of towards you like out of the page and back into the page kind of direction. And also, so this is what I was sort of talking about earlier. There exist transitions. So you know, in case you want to do anything just with CSS, which is actually the sort of best practice. If anything, here's a takeaway from Web Design DeCal. If you take away anything from this lecture, it's that if you can do it in CSS3, then do it in CSS3. It's just better because it renders faster, and typically, I guess it's better to read, and that's just best practice. So you know, if you could do like some sort of 3D transform in JavaScript, try to lean on the side of doing it in CSS instead. But anyway, where was I going with that? Oh yeah, transitions. So transitions, you know, it's sort of self-explanatory. In this case, I have a box that's 50 by 50 pixels, and then upon hovering over it, if I didn't have this transition here, it would just immediately, just in the blink of a second, just become 100 by 100, double its size. But because I have this transition here, I specify exactly how long I want this to take. I say 0.2 seconds, so it kind of gradually eases into it, which is the better behavior. Question?
Do you have to define transition in the box or box hover?
That's a great question. So the question is, do you have to define transition in the box or the box hover, the one with the pseudo-class? You can do it in both. And you can imagine how that might be, right? Because right when you hover off this enlarged 100 by 100 box, it'll immediately sort of shrink back in the same way that you didn't want it to in the first place. So if you put a second transition, it would actually go back at whatever transition seconds that you specified. So most likely it'd be 0.2 seconds, because that makes the most sense. It's how much it took. But yeah, great question. OK. So this is sort of I've just given you basically a primer of HTML5 and CSS3. There's a lot of other things you can find online, a lot of great tutorials. This is sort of like an intro class again, so you know, feel free to continue looking up tutorials. But another thing that I think this would not be a complete web design course without talking about is definitely browser compatibility. So like I said, you know, the web is amazing, and some 2.34 billion people use it, right? Like, that's crazy, because how many people are there in the world? Like 7 billion? So, but the thing is, not everyone is got a MacBook Pro Retina 15-inch and you know, can go to university like we do. So they often also like aren't privileged enough to have like things that can run the browsers and technologies that we run. So it's crucial if you expect your web application or website, you want it to be able to be compatible with older browsers. And so this is actually a huge design thing, is that not all browsers are created equal. So Google Chrome and Mozilla Firefox and Internet Explorer, these are sort of the big three. There's also Opera, actually. So here's sort of like the big five browsers. You can probably recognize their icons. But essentially, like, you don't have to worry about any other browsers but these. So you know, there might be obscure ones, but basically just designed for the big five, and that's these, which is, you know, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, IE, and Opera. So the thing is, like, some behavior that you might expect to work on one might not necessarily work on the other, and you'll get bug reports saying like, hey, I tried using your site on Firefox, but suddenly, something broke or something that, looks really wrong. And then you have to develop for that too. So if you're going to ship something, if you're going to ship or basically, push something online and you want it to be used by a lot of people, then make sure it's browser compatible. That's definitely a huge thing. So an example of that here, this image is a little blurry, but you have this like sort of drop-down menu. You expected it to be in the right place, but it wasn't. And it might not necessarily be your fault as a developer. It just might be that you have to design for different browsers. So how does one go about doing that? Something called vendor prefixes. It's not super complicated at all, really. It's just like a prefix, like something that you sort of attach to the front of whatever you're going to put, so that it will be compatible with other rendering engines. So how do I mean by that? Well, I mean that even though the browser is called Google Chrome, the rendering engine underneath is called WebKit. I don't know if this sounds familiar to you. We might have probably talked about WebKit just sort of in passing. But WebKit is the name of the browser rendering engine. And that's more powerful because other browsers can use the same rendering engine. Like Google Chrome and Opera use the same rendering engine. They both use WebKit. So instead of doing just standard transform, you should do WebKit-transform, right? So that way, everything that uses WebKit will be able to recognize and read that and go, oh, there's the one that I can read, and then it would execute that. Is there a question?
Yeah, I was a little curious about why that is. Why can't the browser just automatically put that prefix in for you, kind of thing?
So the question is, why can't the browser automatically do this for you? Just not smart enough to. That's just day and age we live in. Basically, if you want to do a transform and you want it to work everywhere, it's transform, WebKit transform, Moz transform, O transform, and it looks redundant and it looks like cringeworthy, and it is. So hopefully in the future this will be cleared up. But just to prepare you now, that's the state of affairs. That's how it is. So yeah, Firefox. Firefox is made by Mozilla, so their vendor prefix is -moz-, and then you have transform or translate or whatever you wanted for that. Oh boy. So now we should talk about Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer is like such a problem child. It's first of all, I hope I don't offend anyone who's like a hardcore Microsoft fan or like user of Internet Explorer. Most likely, statistically, nobody in here should be. But if you are, don't raise your hand when I ask you. So we're going to talk a little bit about Internet Explorer and why it's just a bit of a challenge. So here's like a bit of history of Internet Explorer. It's always been basically rather behind in terms of rendering technologies. Like every other browser supports display inline block, except for perhaps the most common one in the world, which is always a little bit annoying. Like from 2001 to 2009, you couldn't have the basic offsets, the ones that we talked about in our positioning lecture, the ones like top, bottom, left, and right. Those just simply wouldn't work. So that's a long 8 years of Great Depression on the web side. But then finally in 2009 it's OK, but then you don't have display inline block, which is crucial for horizontally aligning elements. So again, we're still behind. And IE9, which I think is for the most part the one that Microsoft sort of stands behind the most, you have to add this. You had to add this -ms prefix, Microsoft prefix, I guess. But typically adding a prefix is just sort of frowned upon because it's just another thing you have to add in the redundancy list, right? Because you already had to add Moz and -o for Opera and -WebKit- for WebKit-based browsers. So now in IE10, at least as of the most stable release that I know of, you don't have to do that anymore, which I guess is OK. But the thing is, since Microsoft was such a power player and they shipped so many IEs, like I don't know if you guys are from foreign countries, or at least have family in foreign countries that are sort of a little bit behind. But like when you go and see your grandma or grandpa's computer, like what browser are they typically running? They're probably running Internet Explorer. Yeah, like I don't know if you have family in China, but a lot of China still uses Internet Explorer, which I guess makes a lot of sense just because they bought computers a long time ago. So like as bad as like Windows is to develop for. Oh yeah, you can't. Oh, you can't download Chrome in China. Okay, well that is another sort of hindrance. You can't because the state won't let you. So yeah, that sucks. But then again, the majority of the world, as of right now, I'm pretty sure this is still true, but the majority of the world still uses Internet Explorer just because Microsoft has amazing distribution and has been, and they own the world. But they own the world in a way that they almost regret because fragmentation, aka having a lot of users but they have different versions, old and new, of what you ship, is like not such a good thing. In fact, I think that Windows is actually sort of well, they already have like long announced that XP support for IE6 is long gone, but they've even gone so far as to like mark down they can't wait till the death of IE6, and this is sort of like a heat map of the world of like what percentage of that population still uses IE6, and they're just waiting until it's 0 everywhere, so they can finally say yes, it's dead, because even they are like, oh my gosh, let's move on. This is from a long time ago. Destroy IE. So we're on IE, and yet they strongly push for the death of IE.
Wait, this is their own product?
This is their own product, and it makes sense because if you're a big software company, you don't necessarily want people on stuff that's like a decade old. You want stuff like you're working so hard because you're making new software that's better, hopefully. So yeah, hopefully. But anyway. IE has the biggest slice of the pie, so if you really want your stuff to ship and go global, you got to develop for IE too. And the way you do that, actually, really quick, is that in your HTML, there's actually sort of conditional statements, or sort of like if the person is using IE something, then use a different style sheet kind of things. And they look like this syntactically. And basically, it's sort of self-explanatory. It's actually pretty clear. It says if LT, which stands for less than. So if the person is less than IE9, then you'll want to render this style sheet instead. And so notice how it's got link and the same style sheet stuff. And then you basically won't have to do this for every page, just for pages that you were like designing to be sort of industry ready, sort of like this is going to ship to like billions of people kind of thing. And for people at least will be very mad because you didn't support IE, then this is just worth knowing that there is ways to support it. And that's really by creating like separate style sheets. And that's sort of all I have for you today on, and that's actually the end of HTML and CSS for this class. Question?
So does IE10 run under WebKit now?
Oh, so the question is, does IE10 run under WebKit? I'm actually not entirely sure. No. The answer is no. OK.
Microsoft wants to do everything on their own. They're not going to use the third-party software.
That's actually a real shame, because WebKit is absolutely amazing. WebKit is open source, and like dozens of strangers collaborate on it on a regular basis, and so they built something really cool and really great. Yet large companies, for some reason, still tend to disregard it or have already made their own, and they're too deep into it to sort of change. But yeah. Any other questions? All right, cool. All right, well, now I'm going to hand it off to this really cool hands-on we've got for you with Philip and Adam.
Okay, so for this week, what we're going to do is play around with the transition or some of the CSS3 attributes that Andy mentioned earlier, and you guys will just get to see how they work. Okay, so if you guys want to follow along, there's this css3.html page you guys should open, and what you guys should see is this. What we're gonna do is just so the first thing we want to do is get a general idea of how this is laid out. So you guys can see like this black and white contrast. The black panel we kind of call night, and then the white panel we kind of call day, and they're kind of side by side. So the first thing we want to do is kind of switch. Let's move the black panel to the right side of the screen. So what we could do with that is give it a right 0, since you can notice that it's already a position fixed. So if we just do a right 0, it's just make sure that its right is aligned. It has no space on its right. It starts from 0. And the next thing we'll do is, if you guys see there's like a white box, let's make that black. Essentially what our goal is to try to create like an arrow coming out of the black panel. So let's give it a background color of 222, which is not like pure black, but it's close to black. And then the next thing we want to do, so the trick to creating an arrow, since you know how all divs are squares, the trick is to kind of rotate it 45 degrees so that it looks like a diamond, and just like half of it pops out so it looks like an arrow. So here we'll use the CSS3 property transform. So we do transform and then rotate 45 degrees. So now you can see like, okay, so it's like rotated 45 degrees now. Now we need to position it correctly. Let's give it a position absolute. So you guys remember that from, I think it was last week's lecture, when you give an element position absolute, it finds its first non-static static positioned element. And in this case, it would be the night panel, because that was position fixed, right? So if we now say top 50%, what this will do is it'll make it 50% relative to the night panel. And now let's move it. So you see how it's like, it's kind of like the thing where you want to center vertically, but then you have to move it back up half of it. So let's give it a margin left of -25 pixels to make it pop out all the way. And then since we did top 50% and we want it to be truly vertically centered, instead of using the calc function, we can go ahead and see that the div is 50 pixels right there. So, oh yeah, to the left, the inspector.
Oh.
Yeah, so let's give it a margin top of -25 pixels. We don't really need to do calc in this case because it's pretty easily seen. The next thing we want to do is, if you look at the social media buttons, it'll probably be easier to see on the day panel, right there, bottom left. Those are stacked vertically. Let's just use things we learned to make them stack side by side. So we can give them display inline block. And remember, when a div has an inline block display, they still respect their left and right margins and padding. So you can see by the green. And so let's just say margin left of -5 pixels to put them side by side. Okay. So things are starting to look pretty good. But you guys learned about contrast, right? The importance of having contrast. So if you look at the night panel, like everything is dark. And you guys can barely read what's on there. So what we should do is, let's give night a color of white. Okay, so now everything on the night panel has a white color. And as a general design rule, for darker backgrounds, a lower opacity value looks better. So what we're gonna do is, we're gonna make the text, or not the text, but the items, like the about, night shop, night cart, we're gonna make those have an opacity value. Let's give it an opacity value of 0.2. So night menu item. Let's give it an opacity of 0.2. And notice how we're going down by doing #night space dot menu or class menu space class item. So now it has an opacity of 0.2. And similarly for the day menu items, let's give them an opacity of 0.4. Okay, so now if you look, like you can kind of see it better, and with the different opacities, What we want to do is that when you hover over a specific item, we want to make the opacity 1 again, so you can kind of tell like where you are or what you're trying to select. So what we would do is use the hover selector. You guys have seen that before. So to just the menu item in general, because for both of them, right? Not just for the day menu items, not just for the night menu items, but for both of them, we want to do a hover. And then let's change the opacity to 1. So now if we try it. Oh. Okay, we'll do it to the specific opacity or the specific like day menu item, and then do it to night menu item. Yeah, so you can see the opacity change from 0.4 to 1, and let's do it similarly for the night. Okay, so now it should, yeah, you guys can see like, oh, it's hovering to 1. Now here we can add another CSS3 attribute, which is the transition that Andy just mentioned. So basically to reiterate, the transition what it does is whenever there's a change in the CSS rules, it will kind of spread that out over the time you give it. So on the menu item containers, let's give it a transition of 0.3 seconds. The menu item, yeah, this one. Transition of 0.3 seconds. And then don't forget we want to support other browsers. So let's do it for Firefox or Mozilla and also WebKit. You'll notice that, okay, see the Google Chrome inspector kind of crosses out Moz transition because it doesn't use that. And as soon as you put WebKit in, it crosses out the default transition just because WebKit is more specifically tailored for Chrome. So you guys can kind of see it. I mean, 0.3 is not a lot. It makes a difference. But if you want to see a bigger difference, we can like up that number to like 1.5. And you guys can really see it now. You guys see that? Nice, huh? And then, yeah, let's just change it back to 0.3 because it doesn't look great functionality. Or it doesn't like, it's not very functional to have it slowly change. And I guess there's just one more thing that's kind of cool that we can do is you guys have seen transitions over shades of color. So we'll show you a transition over like a width the size of a div. So basically what we're going to do is take that night panel, and you know how there's an arrow kind of suggests that it's going to move. So when you hover over the night panel, what we want to do is change the width to 97%. The reason why we're not doing 100% is because you saw there's that arrow, right? If we did 100%, the arrow would get cut off. So right here, it like goes right to the edge. And then, this instantaneous change is kind of annoying. Let's have it have a transition of 0.7 seconds. And that's how it looks. It looks cut off because of the screen, but I promise on this computer it's not cut off. And then I guess as good practice, you want to support Firefox and Chrome specifically. So we'll just add the Moz transition and the WebKit transition. So yeah, that's about all we had for you guys today. Are there any questions? No? Okay, great. Thank you.
Because we have some time, do any of you have any questions about the group project that we can help you with? Any questions regarding group project or any requests for help? No requests?
Is Nathaniel here? Nathaniel? Okay. I'm meeting with you guys later.
Okay, there's no homework this week because the group project is due next week. For the group project, we expect that all of you will be here. If any of you cannot make it, then please submit an absence request via our portal. We're gonna have a 10-15 minutes break. If you guys have any questions regarding group project, please come up to us so that we can help you. Okay, thank you. Uh, uh, uh. Okay, we're gonna get started. Today's topic would be color and branding. So I think that I saw your group projects this second, and a lot of you went for a very black and white color scheme. So I think that today's lecture will be very helpful when you're trying to solidify the branding and color of your website. So last week we discussed some very important concepts such as layouts, navigation, content frame, specific content, f-star layouts, and so on and so forth. And we also talked about landing page designs with backgrounds and mixing text with images. And today's topic will be color and branding. So before we begin, again, as always, we're going to poke at some of the ugly websites. And the first up, we have this. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this user interface, if you can call it a user interface? It's sort of spam, yeah. Any thoughts on this website? Is there Comic Sans? Where's the Comic Sans? Oh, the middle one, the January 2012, I think. Yeah. So one student suggested that there's too much Comic Sans, so maybe a choice of typography. What would be other some issues with this website?
It's so layered and messed up.
Yeah. So another student said that there are a lot of layers. So things are on top of each other. As you can see, the car, the stop sign, it's on top of the content, and there's the air balloon covering up another guy's face. There are a lot of layers. What would be other issues about this website? Yeah. Yeah, so she says that the designer, she doesn't know where to focus on because there are so many things all over the place. So that's a very, very good feedback because one of the things that's very, very important when it comes to user interface design is that you have to have a focal point for the user. This website clearly does not have any focal point. Any other thoughts before we move on to next website? Cool, the next website is very interesting. It's Yale University School of Art website. Yes. What's wrong with this website?
No margins. Actually no borders, I would say, more precisely.
No borders around what?
About literally everything, especially the text.
So one student suggested there are no borders. Sometimes no border website can work if you just have right amount of right differences in color and contrast. I think in this case, border is not the biggest problem. What would be other problems with this website? Background. Yes. So one student suggested the background is the problem. The background is repeated. It's not one background. First of all, the background is weird. Number two, there is one image is repeating all over the place, which is generally not a good idea because right now you have nine person on as a background. Any other suggestions? What about this website's use of color? Yeah.
Yeah, the bright yellow makes it really hard to read.
Yeah. So the student says that the background behind the text is too bright. So yellow is a very, very bright color. So it's not a good idea to splash yellow a lot in your website. I think one of the biggest mistakes is the text, the Yale University School of Art. The text is orange on top of a greenish background. So I think that's too big of a contrast even. It's too bright too. And if you can look at this website, there are 4 colors in this website. There's white, blue, yellow, and orange. I think it's too many colors in one website. So that brings us to, yeah.
One thing I just found, I went to the website.
Yes.
Anyone can edit it if you have a Yale student ID.
Yeah, so the reason why this website is so bad is because anyone can upload anyone can choose the background image. So as long as you have a your school ID. So people would upload like really weird backgrounds, and that would make this website look really bad. Yep. So today's topic is about color. We're going to talk about some basic theory of color theories, people's psychology behind color, color palette, what color should you choose for your website, and lastly, we're going to talk about branding of your website. So let me first talk about some basic theory about color. We're not a graphic design class, but so we're going to cover this very, very quickly. So there's this thing called color wheel that shows you the main color hue, the main colors, and how the relationships between each color. So the first part of color wheel is primary color. That'll be red, blue, and yellow. And when you mix each of these primary colors, you get a secondary color. So if you mix red and blue, you get purple. If you mix red and yellow, you get orange. Blue and yellow, you get green. And if you mix each of these secondary colors, you get a tertiary color. So if you mix the purple with green, you get this cyan color, and so on and so forth. So color wheel, it's just some like cool little thing that shows the relationship between colors. It's not super relevant to web design, but just for sake of curiosity. So to go over each of the primary colors one by one, let's start off with red. So red is the color of Stanford, and yeah, I'm just saying, not saying my opinions, but red is a very strong and emotionally intense color. So that's why it's very used widely in relationship websites and food websites. And I'm going to give you some websites of those in a bit. And because red is so strong and so intense, it's not a good idea to red all over your website, because it's going to be, as one of the students said about yellow, it's too bright. It's too nauseating for some people if you use red all over the place. So that's why red is usually used as an accent for each specific feature, like a button, maybe a cancel button. So one quick interesting fact about red is that red is an appetite-inducing color. So that's why red is very widely used for food websites like Grubhub, Pizza Hut, McDonald's. A lot of these food websites use red because it's appetite-inducing. Grubhub is a food delivery website. Again, this is a food-related website, so that's why they use red as their main primary color. Relationship websites use red all over the place too. I think relationships are symbolized by heart and red, so that's why Tinder, a very popular relationship app, uses red as their main primary color. Another primary color that I'm going to look at is yellow. Yellow is a very bright color. People like to associate it with creativity. We're going to do a lorem ipsum real quick. So Philip and Hamza are going to show you the lorem ipsum word of the week. So yellow is, the thing with yellow is that it's like red has an appetite-inducing effect. Yellow has a decision-inducing effect. So it induces people to make a quick decision. So when it comes to quick decision-making, shopping websites love it. So this because they want you to spend your money so that they can earn more money. So like Amazon and a lot of other shopping websites use yellow as their primary color. And because yellow is so bright, it has very low contrast compared to other colors. So it's very prone to making text very hard to read due to lack of contrast. So I don't recommend using yellow a lot in your websites. So here's an example of a shopping website. It's an Amazon. And for Amazon, they want you to spend money. So their add to cart button, the buy button, it's in yellow for a quick decision-making effect. And any other buttons related to purchasing has the yellow button, like add to cart, and every yellow add to cart buttons have yellow. Their logo has yellow, and so on and so forth. Next, we have blue. Blue is, I consider it as a very safe color. It can be almost of a cop-out because so many websites use blue because it's reliable, it's very calm. You can almost use blue in almost any website that you want. It has a very masculine emotion. It's targeted towards corporate audiences. One really cool thing about blue is that unlike red, red has an appetite inducer. Blue is an appetite suppressor. So as you can notice, like I can't think of any food websites that prominently use blue as their primary color. And maybe that's the reason why Coca-Cola is more successful than Pepsi, red and blue, perhaps. And because blue is a very safe color, it's used for many general purpose websites like Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter. All the social networks have blue. And Walmart and Microsoft, too, they have blue. And because blue is very reliable, a lot of banks use blue as their main color as well. One counterexample would be Wells Fargo, maybe. Again, we have Tumblr. Tumblr is a social networking website, like a microblogging website. They have blue as their main color. Again, blue, you can almost use it anywhere you want. So any questions about color theory, psychology behind colors, before we dive into the main topic, the entree of the day? Cool. So color scheme. So this would answer your question about what color should I choose for my website. So color scheme is a set of colors that web designers choose in a website. And it creates a general theme and direction for your website because, like typography and images, it sets a tone and emotion for your website. And what's really important is that just like typography and images, you should use only 2 to 3 main theme color for your website because you want your users to recognize your website with a certain emotion, certain brand. Therefore, you should only use one color, 1 or 2 colors that users can associate your website with. There are 5 main components to a color scheme. Number 1 is the primary color. This is a theme for your website. So for IMDb, right now, their primary color is yellow. For Tinder, it's red. For Facebook, it's blue. Primary color is a theme, so you should choose this theme. You should choose this one primary color first. You can use it for your main user interface elements like navigation bar, logos, buttons, and so on and so forth. And then sometimes it can get kind of boring if you use that primary color and only that primary color all over your website. So it's important to have one a alternative secondary color that could be used for like accents like submit buttons and so on. And usually there are some exceptions to this, like cancel buttons. You don't usually want your cancel button to be green or blue. So for that, you're going to have to use red. So here's a color palette that we use for web design decal. We have a different color palette for each section. For design section, the primary color is the ugly green. And it'll forever be recognized as the ugly green. And for programming section, the primary color is the blue. But this would be the palette for design section. Primary is green, secondary is blue. For programming section, primary blue, secondary green. And always we have a cancel button and web design decal live, which will be red. So these would be the primary colors. One thing that's really important is that you don't always want to have a black and white website. Black and white website works only in some instances, like blogging websites or very text-heavy websites, because books generally lend themselves to a black and white appeal. But for other websites, like your personal website, you might want to have a brand for yourself, so you might not want to do black and white. And one of the reasons why some of your group projects looked a little bit barren is because it lacked color. So as long as you add some color palette to it, I think it's going to look a lot better. So colors, the next 2 components to a color scheme would be neutral light and neutral dark. Obviously, you don't want your website to look entirely color. You want to have some light color and a dark color. Usually, people want to choose either light color or the dark color as the background. So sometimes people use a very light theme website, like a white color. You can use white, but you can also use some other off-white color, like beige, ivory, even white smoke color. Those are good alternative to using white. And as for dark color, it's the same thing, but dark. Black is a universally dark color, but you can also use alternatives like dark navy. So sometimes if you go all out white and black, like just plain white and plain black, that can look a little bit barren too. So that's why you want to use some alternatives like beige or dark navy. So here's an example of neutral color palettes. So on the top left we have a plain white, and on the bottom left it's kind of hard to see right now, but it's like a ivory-ish color. And on the top left, top right, we have a gray, dark gray color. It's not absolutely black; it's dark gray. On the bottom right, we have a dark navy. And one way you can use your neutral light color scheme is like for cards UI. Google now has this. A lot of cards-based Facebook, even Facebook has it. Card UI-based websites use this technique. They have a off-white, slightly dark neutral light color. So in this case, we have a background color of ivory, and the cards have the background color of white. And this is really useful because it provides a very subtle contrast for your cards to separate itself from the rest of the background. So again, just to summarize the color scheme, there are 5 main components. Primary color, you should choose this first and foremost. Secondary color, some maybe cancel button, and neutral light and neutral dark. And after you choose these main 5 categories of color, then you can adjust the tone, adjust the brightness of this color to create a full color palette. So you shouldn't have like 12 different colors for each of the colors, but you should choose these 5 colors and then adjust the brightness based on this color to create something like this. So I have 3 colors: primary, secondary, and cancel button. And then based on that, I am adjusting the brightness of these 3 primary colors to create a color palette. So last semester and the semester before, I would say that you should go to this website called Color Hexa that tells you the brightness of a color. Excuse me. Go to colorhexa.com. You enter in a color, the green, and you can see that it shows you, based on this color, it shows you different shades of this color. So this would be a darker shade of the color, and this would be the lighter shade of the color. This is useful, but this is not a good idea for all cases, because every time you want to add new color, you have to go to this website and try to find a new hex code for this new color. So another way, which we're going to do a little bit different this semester, is to use opacity. So opacity is called alpha layer. What you can do is you can use opacity to de-emphasize certain elements by decreasing the opacity of a certain element. So what you can do is you can give it a background of black, and then you can decrease the opacity to 50% to de-emphasize one element from another. So opacity takes on a value from 0 to 1. 0 is transparent, and 1 is solid. So to give you an example, here we have a title and a subtitle / description. Title has the opacity of 1 with a color white. So the title gets the most amount of emphasis. But the description gets an opacity of 0.6. So because it is because it's more transparent than the title color, it gets less emphasis. So you don't have to go to another website like Color Hexa and type in a color and try to find a lighter version of this color, but you can use opacity to blend certain colors to create a variation of the palette. Any questions regarding opacity? Another example would be this. By default, a button takes on a color on the left. And when you hover over it, you generally want that color to be like darker. So what you can do is, by default, opacity is like 0.6 or 0.7. And when a user hovers over a button, which you guys have learned in the programming section, you can make the opacity to 1 to give the user a state that it is the user that you have hovered over a button. Another example of using opacity would be showing active and inactive states. So in our assignments panel, some assignments are active, as in you can submit an assignment and all, but some assignments are not active yet. So homework 6 and homework 7 are not ready yet. So for these assignments, we have decreased opacity to indicate that you cannot click on these elements right now. So TLDR, what you should do is you should choose the main color scheme And based on that color scheme, you can use the opacity to adjust the tone and decrease the brightness and so on and so forth. So now I'm going to talk about contrast. I talked about contrast almost too many times in this class, again, because contrast is one of the most important elements in design. You want to have white on top of dark, and you want to have black on top of light, and so on and so forth. So you don't want almost never place a color on text on top of black or dark colors because it doesn't usually go well, or use black text on top of a colored background. You should use white on color because you want to have a strong contrast between the text and the background color. Here's an example of a website with a great contrast. As you can see on the top bar, it has a background color of white, whereas the text is dark. So it provides a very, very strong contrast. And for the colored background, you have a white text on top of a color to establish a strong contrast as well. One really cool thing is to use color text on top of black. I take that back what I said. I think using black on top of color might be a little bit too ugly in sometimes, but using color on top of black works out really well, especially if you use a very bright color, like neon colors in this example. So neon color icons, neon color text, it can be very useful when you're making a very dark themed website. So if you're making an IMDb, for example, a lot of you have went for a very dark theme website because movie theaters generally symbolize darkness. So darkness. So in that case, you can use very light color, like neon colored, maybe like very bright yellow as some of your accents. Here's another example of a background color on contrast. Here's the work I did, I think, this March. I worked on a convention called K-PopCon. And on the left, I have a color on top of another color. I try to give as much contrast as possible. I try to give it a neon green. It still looks pretty weird. And compared to that, on the right, I have a very much stronger contrast of a black on top of white. And I think that on the right one looks way better than the left. So that's the one that I went for. So now you might ask, so I know how to build a color palette. I choose a primary color, secondary color, neutral light, and so on and so forth. So where do I find good color? Because if you type in this red in your background color, it's probably not going to look good. So one way to do it is to go to other good websites like Facebook. Go to Facebook, look at the hex code of Facebook top bar, and take that blue and kind of tweak it. Or one technique that I use a lot is to use photographs. So I try to travel at least once per year. And when I travel, I take a good photo of a good color, like a scenery, and try to extract the color out of that photograph. So here's an example. This summer, I went to Italy, and this is Burano, Venice. It's a beautiful island. And what's cool about this island is that there are these bright colored houses all over the place. All the houses have these bright colored like walls. So I found that this would be a very good candidate for my new color palette. So I took this photograph. I go to Photoshop, and I can use the eyedropper tool to extract the color. I don't think I have time to demo that right now, but you can extract the color from this photograph. And based on a lot of these like extraction from other different photographs, I can build a full color palette of a Burano color palette, Rome color palette, and so on and so forth. So using a photograph is a very effective way to build your own color palette for a website. So now I'm going to talk about branding. Before I begin, do you have any questions regarding color before we move on to full-on branding? So branding is really important, and I decided to tie in branding with color is because color is about emotion. Color is about brand recognition. You want your user to recognize your website with a certain emotion, certain color. So that automatically lends itself to the discussion of branding in general. A lot of companies create what's called a brand guideline for their projects for two reasons. Number one, again, just what I said, you want your user to associate your company with a brand. And number 2 is for when you're working in a team, you want all of your design to look consistent. One tip that I'd like to give in your group project is that you want to really like separate the labor. You want to allocate one person to do this page and another person to do that page. But overall, in general, the entire website needs to look the same. Google, for example, has a huge design team, but all of their websites generally tend to look similar. It seems as if it's designed by one designer. And that's because they have a brand guideline for their team to follow, so that each designer uses the same typeface, same color, and same amount of spacing. So let me give you an example of a Google branding guideline. It's available on Behance. Not this. So in their guideline, they have, can I scroll? Oh God, OK, I'm just going to scroll. In their guideline, they show each of the things that their designers should do and should not do. So for product icons, they say it needs to be a unique and memorable visual representation of Google product, yada, yada. And when they decided to go for a more like flatter design, they took a reductive approach. Their previous icon was that. Now they have a more flatter icon. They try to take away some extraneous elements. And they have a color palette for each of their designers to follow, so that they want to make their color palettes consistent across different teams. And yeah, as you can see, all of their icons is a combination of their main color palette. The camera is a combination of their neutral light, neutral dark, and red. The search has neutral light, dark, and blue, and so on and so forth. Yeah, if you have time, you can feel free to like go and look at this branding guideline. It's a very, very good resource for any designer. You can search for Google branding guidelines Behance on Google. And if you've noticed, like I think UC Berkeley has went through a great improvement in design as well. I think when I was a freshman, I don't think Berkeley had a very good brand, very good like design, consistent design. But now, if you look across like even Bancroft, right across from ASUC and all, you see like these bright colored like flyers and like banners and all. Is because Berkeley has now established a very solid branding guidelines for their designers. So they have a consistent logo, consistent type, color, and layout, and so on. So branding in general, it's about the vision. Company cannot exist without a vision. A company needs a vision or a mission statement for the purpose that you want to accomplish for the company. And the branding guideline is similar in a way that it gives a direction for the designers to follow. So UC Berkeley branding, they set a certain tone and personality for their entire designs. For Berkeley, it's about curiosity, intensity, optimistic, like influential, socially conscious, independent, real, and open. And they try to display this kind of a tone and personality throughout their design. And for Medium, for them, their product, their vision is everyone's stories and ideas. So that's why for their design guidelines, it starts off with their purpose. The sharing of ideas and experiences is what moves humanity forward. So based on that mission, based on that vision, they try to shape their designs around it. They try to make their focus around publishing. So publishing automatically lends itself to books and typography and typewriter and stuff like that. So that's why they have a black and white color scheme. So again, this is not a graphic design course, but while we're at branding, I want to talk a little bit about logos. Logos is a manifestation of brand recognition. You really have to think about establishing a great brand recognition when you're creating a logo, because you have to make sure that the moment the user or anyone uses that graphic, this person needs to associate that graphic with the company. So that's why alphabet logos are very, very useful. They have a very high brand recognition, because the moment you see the logo with an F, you kind of like, because Facebook starts off with F, it's easier for users to think of Facebook when they see a blue icon with an F drawn on it. So that's why a lot of brands have their logos as alphabets, like Facebook, McDonald's, Tumblr, and so on. You also have to think about brand identity. Your logo should relate to the vision and the name of your client. So Apple has Apple, Microsoft has Windows-like logo, Dropbox has Box. And I'm gonna give you an example real quick, but you should really try hard to stay away from ambiguous logos. I think one of the most cliche logos is circles. Subtle, Coin, Target, they all have circle logos, which I'm gonna show you in a bit. Microsoft did a redesign of their entire brand, and in the process, they redesigned their logo. Microsoft really wants to focus on their new Metro design and Windows. That's why across all their Metro UI, they have rectangles and squares, very sharp edges, and that's why for their logo, they kind of took on the logo of the Windows because that's what people recognize the most when they think of Microsoft. So this is an example of why circle logos are so bad. There are so many companies that use circle logos that look almost the same. Subtle is a blogging platform. Coin is a new credit card company, not credit card company, your credit cards all in one card. And Target is a shopping mall. All three of them have circles, and especially for Subtle and Coin, their logos are almost identical. If you invert the logo of Subtle, you will get the logo of Coin. So this is why when you're thinking of a logo for your website, things like circles, it's not a good idea because the moment they see this logo, they might think of it as Subtle, Coin, or just a grayed out Target logo. So yeah. Some last points. You have to really worry about the target audience. I mentioned this in typography lecture and all over. If you're going for a young audience, you want to go for sans serif. Older audience, classy, so you want to go for serif. Just like what I said earlier, when you're building a relationship or food websites, especially food, you might not want to choose blue. You should go for red. Shopping mall websites, yellow. Even movie websites, a lot of them use yellow. Business, general or purpose websites, you might want to use blue. Medium has they have a branding guideline for their typography. They only use 2 fonts for their entire website. For sans serif, they use a Fright Sans. For their general articles, they use a serif font called Tisa Pro. As I showed, Google branding includes color palettes. So when you're building your IMDb website, you should choose main color palettes, neutral light, neutral dark, primary, secondary, and cancel button, and you use variations of tone for that instead of using different colors all over the place. So just to wrap things up, why is color and branding so important? It's all because of consistency. I think this kind of ties in really nicely with the group project that you guys are working on. You want to make sure that all of your designs are consistent. So before you work on anything, you should have a solid kind of a branding guideline or at least a color palette of sorts so that your websites look consistent. We are going to take off points if the website seems like it's designed by 3 different people. Yeah, so now we're going to get to our hands-on. It's going to be on color and branding. Did you download? All right, take it away.
Hi, so we're going to go over color and branding. We're going to do a mini lecture, and then we'll do an exercise with a small group of people. So first, Sean already talked about this, but different colors mean different moods and different feelings to people. So there's this very helpful graph that tells you what color is usually associated to what kind of mood and what kind of feeling. And this is debatable across cultures and different kind of people, but this is the kind of the general idea of what it usually means. So, so for example, like what Sean said, banks usually go with blue because blue signifies trust.
Interesting that Oreo is under trust.
because you also have to trust Oreos. Okay, so we're going to do an exercise later. So before you start the exercise and before we talk about it, we first have to ask yourself a few questions when approaching building a new website. So you have to think about who is your target audience. So if you're a bank, you're thinking about you want to have more customers to trust you, so they'll put their money with you. And also, what is the purpose of the website? So if your website is to do online shopping, how are you going to redirect your audience attention so they'll start buying things and start using your website? And the third question is, how do I want my website to be used? So do you want them to just browse, or do you want them to sign up right away? So different things to consider. So for example, this is an image of MailChimp. It's a website that you can use to make newsletters. And it's all blurred out so you can see what the colors are and what jumps out. So for example, the red button jumps out automatically because the color is much brighter than the blue. And that button is actually for you to sign up. So right away, when you get on the website, you can see they really want you to sign up. It's because it's not a website for browsing and just to like look around. They want you to like make an account with them. Yeah. Yeah, so the exercise is you pick 2 or 3 people sitting around you is fine. And the prompts are, you can either do a mock-up. So this is just mock-ups, use boxes. And remember to think about colors and the questions that we went over just now. So we're going to give you 10 minutes. And you can either design a corporate website that's a bank, and it's going to be called Park and Quinn, and a dating website called Lovebirds, or a website for preteens called Forever 16, or a time travel website. This is like kind of like a bonus out there thing, like what colors do you think are associated with time travel? And you're going to make a mock-up, either on PowerPoint, that's fine, or if you're talented in like Adobe Illustrator or something like that, you can do that too, or Photoshop. And we're going to make a Piazza post, and you guys can just post a screenshot or like the JPEG image on the Piazza post, and we're going to go over it in the last 5 minutes of class. So have it kind of, it doesn't have to be super fancy, just kind of like boxes and what colors you want to use. So make the boxes like what colors, and post on Piazza, and then you have to kind of explain it. So we'll call a few people, so you can't just be like, I like orange because orange is my favorite color, so I'm using orange all over. So you kind of have to explain the thought process behind, oh, I use blue because it's this kind of website and this kind of audience. So yeah, any questions before we start? No. Okay, so you can pick any of the 4. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can go to some of these websites just to see the past that they have.
Oh yeah, so I linked some websites on the bottom of the hands-on if you want to download it. It's over here. There's Design Seeds, Color Lovers, Pattern on Adobe Color Wheel, and these are just color combinations that people think works well, so you can use them if you want inspiration. Yeah. Cool. So talk with people next to you. 2 to 3 people right now. Go.
We also have picnic this Saturday. So besides normal fun events, you also try to attend one of the big fun events. The 2 big fun events this semester are picnic or Olympics. So definitely try to make it to this one if you can, because if you miss this one and you realize you can't make it to Olympics, you're going to be in the bottom. So in the past, we've gone to Congo Institute Plus, I think that's how you pronounce it, which is on the website. Yeah, it's like a little bit that way. There's barbecue. There's also fun activities like you can see. Yeah, and you can also get challenges completed there. I think some of the things this year are animating films. So you can definitely get a lot of challenges in that as well. So it's definitely a good opportunity. It's about 4 hours, maybe 5 hours long. So it's a good part of your morning and maybe lunch. really fun, and you should definitely try to come out if you can, because like I said, you get rid of your big fun requirement anyways, and so just try to come out this Saturday. We have a service event on Saturday as well at 6 p.m. This is the Autumn Light Festival in Oakland. We'll be meeting at a bar, I think, and then we'll head over there. It's a lot of fun. We've actually never done this before, but we've worked with the org who's hosting this. So definitely try to come to one of the service events. We actually only have, I think, 5 service events this semester, so you need to attend at least 2 of them. So if if you don't attend this one, you only have 4 other ones to attend. Also, what's really important about this one is we need to give like an RSVP or like a head count to the organization that's planning this event. So if you think you can make it or you plan on making it, definitely try to sign up either tonight or by the latest tomorrow night for this event. Yeah, it's about like 2 hours long. I think it'll be pretty fun. If you guys like go on Google and you look up Autumn Light Festival Oakland, you see that it's really pretty. So definitely come out. It'll be a lot of fun. Remember to RSVP. And then we'll have Ultimate with Lucan on the 20th. Is it 25? Okay, 10:25. Let me see. 5. Okay, yeah, okay. On the calendar, it'll be 25. Okay, yeah, if you want to, take part in the societal event with Lucan, which is another org on campus, definitely come out to this one. I think it'll be a lot of fun because, you're going to be studying all the time anyway, so come out, take a break, and play Ultimate. Yeah, we have improv games, which is on the 23rd. So this is a lot of fun. You can see this is Kyle, who was our last person. We have another member of the class. We have Ken this year as well. And these are just improv games. Yeah. Try to come out. What? Did you want to talk about it? You can, yeah, you can sell it. Yeah, definitely come out. I will be there. So come out, get to know your other fellow candidates, and after. Also, we'll have even more fun events later on. There's an event planned on the 28th. It'll be either ballroom dances or board game night, but we're not exactly sure yet. Depends on how things work out with other orgs. But definitely put this on your calendar. People come out. Yeah. Also, this isn't really like a fun event, but we'll be having HM classes, so you can come to that. But yeah, I think ACT is organizing HM Assassins again this semester. So how many of you have played Assassins before? Like with students and all this stuff. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so ACT will send out an email about this for sign up. There'll be more details about like how to sign up, what the rules are. I think in the past we've added twists to it instead of just like stabbing people. I don't know, there's like random twists to it. And also, I think that we're thinking of giving challenges, or ACT will be giving challenges to people who perform really well or who do really well or survive like X day or something like that. So definitely sign up. It doesn't hurt, and it's definitely a lot of fun because you get to talk everything and stuff like that. Yeah, sure. Also coming soon, Berkeley Project, which is another service event. This one has a deadline. Berkeley Project wants us or volunteers to sign up by I think the 18th. So if you're thinking of going to the Berkeley Project, please be sure to sign up. When you go on the website, you can really just do up like Berkeley Project, so it's like berkeleyproject.org, and you need to sign up by the 17th because deadline is the 18th. There'll be like okay, I'll get to that after. Okay. When you sign up, there'll be like an organization that you want to volunteer or be part of, so that your group with them. Be sure to type Ada Afternoon, PGA Afternoon, Ada Afternoon, ATM. And there'll be like a fill-in. You can just pick our group. So the instructions are also on the event calendar. So if you go to htm.ecap.edu, if you go to our website, there's an event calendar, right, where we list all of our events. And if you click on Berkeley Project, it'll give you more instructions on like how exactly sign up if you want to use it. But definitely when you sign up, make sure you sign up as part of our group, just so that we can all volunteer together instead of being a 10 to 15 worker, right? Okay, Berkeley Project. You remember the exact date? I think it's November 8th, right? November 8th, right? Okay, yeah. Yeah. So on November 8th, we typically, like, it's Berkeley Project, but as a group, we'll probably meet on campus, and then we'll be assigned to a work area. We'll go together. I think last year when we did the Berkeley Project, we worked on Strawberry Creek, I think. So we had maybe 30 candidates, officers, members. We walked down to Strawberry Creek and we pulled weeds. But it really depends on which work area we're assigned to. So sometimes we'll go all the way to Allenby to further down Strawberry Creek to maybe like mid-Berkeley, stuff like that. It really depends. We won't really know the details about the area we're assigned to until the day of. But definitely, it's pretty fun. Like, I mean, a lot of it's like, helping the community, but a lot of it is also getting to know the candidates and talking to them and talking to the officers. Yeah, so be sure to sign up. Okay, so I've talked about a lot of these events, right? Service events, fun events, big fun events. And the most important thing is to remember to stay on track, right? Definitely want to stay on track. The next demo meeting, the second one, will be on November 5th, right? So that's 3 weeks away. During that time, you want to have, maybe thought about your challenges, thought about how many, well, at least ask around to see which ones you should do or which ones you want to do, and get them checked off through the candidate portal. So, more details on like candidate challenges. Basically, you can ask any officer that's not in your committee, right? So if I'm part of, or if you're part of service, you can't ask admin leader. Right? You have to ask an officer from tax or the consulate or anything like that. Any officer or committee member that's not in the same committee as you, just so that you can get to know the other officers and other members of HKM. And these are pretty easy. Like I wouldn't stress out too much about candidate challenges, mainly because like in the past we've done ones like serenade me or something like that, and or like go grab 2 other candidates and 2 officers and ask them or something like that. Some of them are like find someone who doesn't know how to play Dota and teach them how to play Dota. So don't be too stressed out about them, but definitely keep them in mind in the next few weeks and make sure that you're at least getting some of them done. So when you get a challenge completed, go on to the candidate portal and request the officer who assigned it to you to approve it. Yeah,
Only 3 views.
All right, we're looking for at least 1 submission today, so we can show it off to the class. Come on, first to post wins.
How do you add a screenshot?
Or to add image.
Add image?
What color did you use?
All right, we have 4 views so far. That's not a very good sign.
So,
How do you add?
huh? So over here, you can look at you can add image. So people adding image, you can click this. Click the insert image. It looks like mountains icon, and you can attach your image. It can be any format as long as it attaches and shows on a page. It can be a screenshot. It can be. It's the mountain. You have to go to rich text editor. So like you see over here. Yeah. So when you open it, it's not the rich text editor sometimes. Why am I using the microphone?
Oh, so they won.
Oh, wait.
We have a winner.
We have a winner! Yay! Or someone who posted.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. No, Chris, you didn't upload anything. Oh, this one. Okay. Okay. Okay, okay, so can this group explain their choices? What is happening?
Firstly, pink is as stereotypically associated with fashion.
We wanted something that was sort of bright and fun and not yellow because German wanted yellow. So we went for like a pink and blue. Like it's hard to pick a color scheme that's like gender neutral. It would like work for both boys and girls. So if you pick pink and blue, it sort of covers all bases. But we also wanted something that like was sort of bold or maybe bombastic, which is why I think it's sort of bright pink. It's hard to I don't know.
Okay, so is this your landing page or?
Yeah.
So they'll click it or something? Okay. Okay.
I like the use of italic text on top. It really emphasizes the word forever. Forever 16. Okay.
Okay, this one.
Yeah.
Explain your choices.
Basically picked a lot of pink because it's like a relationship website, and then
We needed a nice caption, so I think that works out for everyone.
you know, you're a bird, I'm a bird, super romantic.
Yeah.
One comment I have about your website is you should probably have your slogan or whatever that's called in a better position than in the bottom right corner, because you're not really gonna. Many people are not gonna actually look at that title that you have down there. So maybe if you put that under the actual title of the website, or maybe besides it, maybe that would be a better position for it.
Let's see if anything has been updated. Refreshing the page. Chris still hasn't updated
Oh,
anything.
we have more.
Oh,
Oh wow.
let's look at this screenshot. Whoa.
Now let's skip the part where they talk about it.
Okay, so this is pretty cool. We're almost out of time, so we're just gonna look at it. But this is, I like the search bar thing here, and it has like text inside, so you know what to put in there. And this one, that looks like a pink Twitter. Pretty cool. Oh, another one.
Wow.
I like the script font. Very cute. Oh, guys, it's your bank. Everybody goes. The slogan is very emphasizes their.
Not sure how reliable this place is.
The dollar signs just typed to the side. Yeah. Okay. Did anyone submit something and we didn't see it? We can refresh it one more time. No. Oh. This is very eye-catching. Yeah. And you can search right away without logging.
Every gender, but then you just put a guy on the back. Interesting.
He covers all genders. Oh wait, there's another one. Oh, this is so pretty.
What the hell? That is so good.
Oh, I like how it's like open, so you can. It looks like you're exploring.
Nice.
Nice.
Nice use of color too. It's very cartoony and futuristic.
Yes. Let's see. Last refresh. Okay, I think that's it. So yeah, thanks for doing the exercise.